The massive crystal dome of the imperial palace stretched high above the gathered crowd, its walls humming with energy shields that could withstand the blast of a dying star. Emperor Zaxthul of the Vorthak Empire stood on his floating throne, his four arms spread wide as he addressed the assembly of alien dignitaries from across the known galaxy. His reptilian features gleamed under the artificial suns that lit the grand chamber, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a ruler who had conquered 17 star systems. "My friends," the Emperor's voice boomed through the translation matrices, reaching every ear in the vast hall. "Today we celebrate another year of prosperity under Vorthak rule. Our empire grows stronger while our enemies grow weaker." The crowd cheered, a mixture of genuine loyalty and careful political theater. In the far corner of the assembly, almost hidden behind a delegation of tall, blue-skinned Altarians, stood a small group that drew curious glances. They were humans, a recently discovered species from a backwater planet called Earth. The Galactic Council had granted them observer status after their world was brought under Vorthak protection, though most beings present viewed them as little more than clever animals who had somehow learned to speak. The human delegation consisted of 3 individuals: Ambassador Sarah Chen, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing; Dr. Marcus Webb, a xenobiologist who seemed more interested in studying the alien architecture than the political ceremony; and most surprisingly, a 12-year-old boy named Tame Rodriguez, who had earned his place here through circumstances that still had the Galactic Diplomatic Corps buzzing with confusion. Tommy had been part of a first contact scenario gone wrong 6 months ago. When Vorthak scouts had landed on Earth to establish formal relations, they had accidentally released a containment unit holding a creature from the death world of Kithara. The beast, a massive predator known as a thornback, had escaped into the wilderness near Tommy's hometown in New Mexico. While seasoned Vorthak warriors struggled to recapture it, Tommy had somehow managed to approach the creature and calm it down, using nothing but patience and an offering of his lunch sandwich. The incident had become legendary among the diplomatic circles, though most aliens attributed it to luck rather than skill. Humans, they reasoned, were too primitive to truly understand dangerous alien life forms. The boy was here more as a curiosity than a legitimate member of the delegation. Emperor Zaxthul continued his speech, detailing the Empire's latest conquests and technological achievements. The humans listened politely, though Tommy found his attention wandering to the massive viewing windows that showed the palace gardens below. Even from this height, he could see movement in the carefully maintained alien habitats, creatures from dozens of worlds living in artificial environments designed to showcase the Emperor's collection of exotic life. And now, the Emperor's voice took on a more theatrical tone. "Let us speak of the crown jewel of our menagerie. Deep beneath this very palace lies a creature so magnificent, so terrible, that it has remained untamed for over 2 centuries. The Shadow Leviathan of Mordun, a beast that feeds on psychic energy and whose very presence can drive lesser minds to madness." The assembled dignitaries murmured with a mixture of awe and fear. Even among the galaxy's most dangerous predators, the Shadow Leviathan held a special place in nightmare folklore. It was said that the creature had once devoured the entire population of a research station, leaving only empty husks behind. "Many have tried to tame this magnificent beast," the Emperor continued, his voice carrying the weight of ancient challenges. "Warriors from the Krex hegemony, psychic masters from the ethereal collectives, even our own greatest beast tamers. All have failed. Some have died. Others have been left as empty shells, their minds consumed by the creature's hunger." Tommy shifted uncomfortably as he felt the weight of hundreds of eyes beginning to turn toward the human delegation. He had heard stories about the shadow Leviathan during their stay on the capital world, whispered tales from servants and guards who spoke in hushed tones about the thing that lived in the deep levels of the palace. The Emperor's 4 arms gestured dramatically as he built toward his point. This creature represents the ultimate challenge, the final frontier of beast mastery. It has cost our empire millions of credits to contain, and yet it remains as wild and dangerous as the day we captured it. A low rumble of agreement passed through the crowd. The shadow Leviathan was indeed legendary. A symbol of the untamable forces that still existed in the universe despite all of civilization's advances. Then Emperor Zaxthul's eyes fell upon the human delegation, and a cruel smile spread across his reptilian features. The court had been buzzing for months about the primitive humans and their supposed gift for animal handling. The story of the boy and the thornback had become something of a joke among the palace nobles, who saw it as evidence of human ignorance rather than human talent. In fact, the Emperor said, his voice carrying a note of dark amusement, the creature is so magnificent that I would gladly grant dominion over an entire world to anyone brave enough and skilled enough to tame it, perhaps even this very world we stand upon. The suggestion sent ripples of shock through the assembly. The capital world of the Vorthak Empire was the most valuable piece of real estate in known space, a planet-sized city that housed trillions of beings and controlled the flow of trade across 17 systems. But of course, the Emperor continued, his smile widening, such a feat would be impossible. The shadow Leviathan is beyond taming. It exists purely to consume and destroy, a perfect embodiment of chaos that no rational mind could hope to understand or control. The noble laughter that followed was carefully orchestrated, a chorus of agreement that reinforced the Emperor's authority while acknowledging the impossibility of the challenge. It was political theater at its finest, a way for the ruler to demonstrate both his wealth and his wisdom by owning something that could not truly be owned. Ambassador Chen felt a chill run down her spine as she realized where this was heading. The Emperor's eyes had not left the human delegation, and she could see the cruel calculation behind his words. This was not just boastful rhetoric. This was a trap being laid in real time. "Your Imperial Majesty speaks truly," said Carvex, the reptilian ambassador from the hegemony. "The shadow Leviathan is beyond the reach of any mortal being, perhaps even beyond the gods themselves." "Indeed," agreed the floating jellyfish-like representative from the ethereal collective. Its thoughts transmitted directly into the minds of those present. "We have lost 3 of our greatest psychic masters to that creature. Their minds were consumed so completely that not even echoes remained." The Emperor nodded gravely, but Tame could see the anticipation building in his posture. He was setting up for something, creating a narrative that would end with humiliation for the human delegation. "And yet," the Emperor said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register that nonetheless carried to every corner of the vast chamber, "we have heard such interesting stories about human beast mastery, tales of a young boy who tamed a thornback with nothing but kindness and a primitive food offering." The laughter that erupted was no longer carefully controlled. It bubbled up from dozens of different species, a chorus of amusement at the absurdity of the comparison. A thornback, dangerous as it was, could not even begin to compare to the psychic horror that was the shadow Leviathan. Tommy felt his face burn with embarrassment. But something else stirred within him as well. Anger. These beings were laughing at humanity, dismissing them as primitives who had stumbled into one lucky encounter. They saw his people as amusing pets rather than equals. "Perhaps," the Emperor said, raising one clawed hand to quiet the laughter, "our young human friend would care to demonstrate this remarkable talent. After all, if humans truly possess some mystical ability to commune with dangerous beasts, Surely the Shadow Leviathan would respond to such gifts. The challenge hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Ambassador Chen stepped forward quickly, recognizing the trap that had been laid. Your Imperial Majesty, we are deeply honored by your confidence in human abilities, but surely you jest. Tame is just a child. And the Shadow Leviathan is what? The Emperor interrupted, his voice sharp with sudden authority. Too dangerous for the species that claims mastery over beasts. Too challenging for the boy who supposedly tamed a creature that had eluded our best hunters. Dr. Webb moved to stand beside Chen, his scientific mind racing through the political implications. Your Majesty, the boy's encounter with the Thornback was unique circumstances. We cannot assume that... Cannot assume? The Emperor's laugh was like breaking glass. My dear humans, you have spent months regaling the galactic community with tales of your species' special connection to animal life. Your own diplomatic reports claim that humans have domesticated hundreds of species on your homeworld, that you possess an intuitive understanding of non-human psychology that surpasses our scientific methods. Tame felt the truth of those words settle around him like a weight. They had been boasting, in their own diplomatic way, about humanity's relationship with animals. Earth's history of domestication was indeed remarkable compared to most alien civilizations, who tended to either dominate through technology or avoid animal life entirely. But perhaps, the Emperor continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of imperial authority, those were just stories meant to impress primitive minds. Perhaps humans are no different from any other species, full of pride but lacking in substance. The insult was unmistakable, delivered with surgical precision to cut at the heart of human dignity. Around the chamber, alien dignitaries watched with fascination as the trap closed around the human delegation. Ambassador Chen felt the political ground shifting beneath her feet. If they backed down now, humanity would be marked as cowards and braggarts, their reputation in galactic society destroyed before it had truly begun. But if they accepted the challenge, they would be sending a 12-year-old boy to face a creature that had killed experienced warriors. Tame listened to the Emperor's words and felt something crystallize within his young mind. These beings saw humans as primitives, as lucky animals who had stumbled into space travel. They thought human achievements were flukes, human courage was ignorance, human compassion was weakness. He stepped forward before either adult could stop him. "I'll do it," Tame said, his young voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence that fell over the chamber. "Tame, no!" Ambassador Chen reached for him, but he moved just beyond her grasp. "You said anyone who tames the Shadow Leviathan can claim this entire world?" Tame looked directly up at the Emperor, meeting those alien eyes without flinching. Emperor Zaxthul's smile became predatory. This was better than he had hoped. The humans had actually taken the bait, and now he would have the pleasure of watching their pretensions crumble in the most dramatic way possible. "Indeed, young human, those were my exact words. But surely you understand the consequences of failure? The Shadow Leviathan does not simply kill its victims, it feeds on their minds, leaving behind empty shells that exist in a state worse than death." Tame nodded slowly, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was agreeing to. "And you'll honor the agreement? If I tame the Shadow Leviathan, you'll give me this world? Before all these witnesses, I swear by the ancient oaths of my lineage that should you successfully tame the Shadow Leviathan of Morden, I will grant you dominion over this world and acknowledge your claim before the Galactic Council." The Emperor's voice carried the weight of binding law, witnessed by representatives from across the known galaxy. Dr. Webb grabbed Tame's shoulder, leaning down to whisper urgently in his ear. "Son, you don't understand what you're agreeing to. This creature is beyond anything on Earth. It's not just dangerous, it's fundamentally alien in ways that could destroy your mind just by being near it." Tame looked up at the older man, and Dr. Webb was startled by the quiet determination he saw in the boy's eyes. Dr. Webb, do you remember what you taught me about convergent evolution? How similar problems create similar solutions across different worlds? Yes, but Tommy, this isn't... And do you remember what Ambassador Chen said about the importance of first impressions in galactic politics? How humanity only gets one chance to prove we belong here? Dr. Webb felt his protest die in his throat as he realized the boy understood far more than any 12-year-old should have to. I'll do it, Tommy said again, louder this time, addressing the entire assembly. But I have one condition. The Emperor's eyebrow ridges rose in surprise. A condition? You are hardly in a position to make demands, young human. If I fail, Tommy said steadily. If the Shadow Leviathan kills me or drives me insane, you have to promise that humanity will still be treated with respect in galactic society. You can't use my failure as proof that humans are primitive or unworthy. The request caught everyone off guard. Ambassador Chen felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as she realized the boy was trying to protect humanity's future even as he risked everything. Emperor Zaxthul considered the request, his political mind already calculating the angles. If the boy failed, it would be more effective propaganda to present humans as brave but misguided rather than simply cowardly. A noble failure could actually enhance the Empire's reputation for mercy. Very well, the Emperor agreed. Should you fail, I will proclaim that you died with honor, facing a challenge that has defeated our greatest warriors. Your species' reputation will remain intact. Tommy nodded, then turned to Ambassador Chen. Ma'am, I need you to record everything that happens down there. Whatever I do, whatever I say, humanity needs to learn from it. Tommy, we can find another way. No, ma'am. Tommy interrupted gently. We can't. This is our chance to show the galaxy who humans really are. And maybe, if I'm wrong about everything, at least other humans can learn from my mistakes. The chamber buzzed with conversation as the implications of what was happening began to sink in. A human child was about to attempt something that had been deemed impossible by the greatest experts in the galaxy. It was either the height of courage or the depth of foolishness, and no one was quite sure which. Emperor Zaxthul clapped his four hands together, the sound echoing like thunder through the vast space. Then let it begin. Guards, escort our brave young human to the deep chambers. Let all present bear witness to this historic moment. As Tommy was led toward the massive doors that would take him down into the depths of the palace, he caught Ambassador Chen's eye one last time. Remember, he said quietly, humans don't give up, even when everyone thinks we should. The doors closed behind him with a sound like distant thunder, leaving the assembly in tense silence as they waited to see whether the human boy would emerge victorious, dead, or worse than dead. In the depths below, something ancient and hungry stirred, sensing the approach of fresh prey. The elevator that carried Tommy down into the depths of the palace moved with the smooth silence of advanced technology, but each floor they passed seemed to drain more light from the world. The Vorthak guards who accompanied him said nothing, their reptilian faces betraying no emotion as they watched the human child who had volunteered for what they considered certain death. Tommy pressed his hands against the transparent walls of the elevator shaft, watching the levels slide by. The upper floors showed glimpses of luxury and light, grand halls where the business of empire was conducted in comfort and safety. But as they descended deeper, the architecture changed. The walls became thicker, more reinforced. Emergency blast doors waited at regular intervals, ready to seal off entire sections if something went wrong. How deep does this go? Tommy asked one of the guards, a scarred veteran named Krex, who had been assigned to ensure the human made it to his destination alive. 27 levels beneath the main palace, Krex replied, his voice carrying the mechanical quality of his species' translation implant. Each level is designed to contain threats of increasing magnitude. The Shadow Leviathan rests at the bottom, in a chamber built from the same materials we use to armor our battleships. Tommy nodded, absorbing the information. 27 levels. That meant this creature was considered more dangerous than whatever threats occupied the 26 levels above it. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, Tommy found himself growing calmer as they descended. Fear was natural, but panic would kill him faster than any monster. "Has anyone ever made it past level 20? Tommy asked. Krex glanced at his companion, another guard named Vex, before answering. 3 individuals have reached the final chamber in the past 2 centuries. A Krex warlord, a psychic master from the ethereal collective, and our own greatest beast tamer, Zorthak the Magnificent. What happened to them? The warlord emerged 3 days later as an empty shell. He could perform basic functions, but showed no recognition of friends, family, or even his own reflection. The psychic master was found dead, his brain tissue liquefied from psychic overload. Zorthak..." Krex paused, his scarred features tightening with what might have been remembered grief. "Zorthak was my teacher. He believed that any creature could be understood if approached with the right combination of respect, patience, and strength. And he never emerged from the chamber. When we sent probes down after a week, we found him sitting in the center of the room, staring at the creature with a smile on his face. He was still alive, still breathing, but he would not respond to any stimulus. We had to use mechanical retrieval units to bring him out, and he has remained in that state for 43 years. Tommy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the deep chambers. "Is he still..." "He lives, if you can call it living. He sits in the medical wing, staring at nothing, occasionally laughing at jokes no one else can hear. The physicians believe the creature shared its thoughts with him, and his mind could not handle the alien perspective." The elevator continued its descent, and Tommy found himself thinking about what the guards had told him. 3 attempts, 3 different kinds of failure. Strength had failed, psychic mastery had failed, and even the supposed expertise of professional beast tamers had failed. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe everyone who had tried to tame the Shadow Leviathan had approached it with the assumption that it needed to be controlled or dominated. Earth animals, Tommy had learned through years of helping at his uncle's veterinary clinic, responded better to partnership than domination. "Tell me about the creature itself," Tommy said. "Not the stories or legends, but what you actually know about its biology and behavior." Vex, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "It is approximately 12 meters in length, with a serpentine body that seems to be composed of living shadow. It has no visible eyes or mouth, yet it can see and it feeds. Its primary sustenance appears to be psychic energy, which it drains from living beings within a radius of approximately 50 meters. "How does it hunt in the wild?" Tommy asked. "Unknown. The creature was captured as a juvenile on the death world of Mordoon. The entire planet was evacuated shortly after due to an unstable star, so no ecological studies were possible." Tommy frowned. A creature removed from its natural habitat as a juvenile and kept in isolation for 2 centuries. No wonder it was aggressive and untamable. It had never learned normal social behaviors, never had the chance to develop the complex relationships that even predators maintained with their environment. "What does it do when it's alone? When no one is trying to tame it?" Krex and Vex exchanged glances. This was not the kind of question previous challengers had asked. They had focused on the creature's offensive capabilities, its weaknesses, its potential vulnerabilities. None had shown interest in its daily behavior. "It moves through the chamber in patterns," Krex admitted. "The surveillance systems track its movements, and there appears to be some kind of routine. It spends approximately 6 hours in what our scientists believe is a rest state, coiled in the center of the chamber. Then it becomes active, moving around the perimeter in complex geometric patterns. Like it's pacing? Perhaps. The patterns are consistent but serve no apparent purpose. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. Pacing behavior in captive animals was usually a sign of stress, boredom, or frustration. Even the most dangerous predators could develop neurotic behaviors when kept in inadequate environments. The elevator finally came to a stop, and the doors opened to reveal a chamber carved from solid rock and lined with energy-dampening materials. The walls hummed with the power of containment fields designed to prevent psychic overflow from affecting the upper levels of the palace. "This is as far as we can accompany you," Krex said, gesturing toward a heavily reinforced door at the far end of the chamber. "Beyond that door lies the Shadow Leviathan's domain. The chamber is equipped with emergency teleportation systems that will activate automatically if your life signs cease. But they cannot function while you are in direct contact with the creature." Tommy approached the door, noting the multiple layers of security systems and warning indicators. The final barrier between him and the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy was surprisingly simple: just a thick metal door with a manual opening mechanism. "One last question," Tommy said, turning back to the guards. "When the creature feeds on psychic energy, does it show any preference for specific types of mental states? Fear, anger, calm?" "All previous subjects showed extreme fear upon encounter," Vex replied. "The creature appeared to become more aggressive in response to fear-based psychic emanations." "What about when it's alone? What's its behavior like when no one is trying to tame it?" "The surveillance recordings show curious behavior. Sometimes it appears to create shapes in the air using its shadow substance, complex geometric forms that hold together for several minutes before dissolving. Our scientists believe this may be some form of natural instinct related to nest building or territorial marking." Tommy felt a spark of recognition. An intelligent creature, kept in isolation, creating art or puzzles to occupy its mind. Maybe the Shadow Leviathan wasn't just a mindless predator. Maybe it was desperately lonely. "Thank you," Tommy said to the guards. "If I don't come back, please tell Ambassador Chen that I tried to remember everything she taught me about diplomacy." Krex stepped forward, his scarred features showing something that might have been respect. "Young human, you show courage that would honor any warrior. If you succeed in this impossible task, songs will be sung of your bravery across the galaxy. And if I fail, then you will have failed attempting something that the greatest beings in the galaxy could not achieve. There is no shame in that." Tommy nodded, then turned toward the door. His hands were steady as he engaged the opening mechanism, but his heart was beating so fast he was sure the aliens could hear it through their chest armor. The door opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, revealing a chamber that seemed to extend beyond the reach of light. The walls were visible only as faint outlines, and the floor appeared to be made of the same energy-absorbing material that lined the access chamber. And in the center of that vast space, something moved. Tommy stepped through the doorway, and the door sealed behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. The chamber was larger than he had expected, easily the size of a football stadium, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. Emergency lighting provided a dim glow that seemed to be absorbed by the very air, creating an environment of perpetual twilight. The Shadow Leviathan hung suspended in the center of the chamber, a serpentine form that seemed to be composed of living darkness. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, its body flowing through the air in patterns that defied both gravity and logic. As Tommy watched, it created a complex spiral formation that held together for nearly a minute before dissolving back into its more natural, coiled position. The creature had noticed his presence. Tommy could feel its attention like a weight pressing against his mind. probing at the edges of his consciousness with alien thoughts that his human brain struggled to interpret. Fear would have been the natural response. Every instinct Tommy possessed screamed at him to run, to call for help, to do anything except stand calmly in the presence of a creature that had driven seasoned warriors insane. Instead, Tommy sat down cross-legged on the floor and began to think. The shadow Leviathan's probing became more insistent, and Tommy felt the first whispers of alien thoughts touching his mind. They were incomprehensible at first, like trying to understand a language that used colors instead of words. But gradually, patterns began to emerge. Loneliness. Crushing, overwhelming loneliness that had lasted longer than human civilization. The creature had been torn from its home world as a juvenile before it had learned to properly interact with others of its kind. For 2 centuries, it had lived in this chamber with no companionship except the minds of those who came to dominate it. Tommy felt tears running down his cheeks as the full weight of the creature's isolation hit him. It wasn't evil or malicious. It was just desperately, agonizingly alone. Slowly, carefully, Tommy began to project his own thoughts back toward the creature. Not words, which would have been meaningless to an alien mind, but emotions and images. The feeling of sitting by a campfire with friends. The comfort of his mother reading him a bedtime story. The joy of playing with his dog in the backyard. The shadow Leviathan's movement stopped entirely as it focused on these alien concepts. Friendship, family, companionship. These were things it had never experienced but had somehow always craved. Tommy continued to share memories, painting pictures of human social bonds with his thoughts. The creature began to descend slowly from its position in the center of the chamber, moving with curiosity rather than aggression. When it was only a few meters away, Tommy could see that what had appeared to be living shadow was actually something far more complex. The creature's body was composed of billions of tiny particles that could shift between states, sometimes solid, sometimes energy, sometimes something that existed between the two. It was like looking at a being made of controlled quantum fluctuations. The shadow Leviathan extended a portion of itself toward Tommy, not to attack but to explore. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, and Tommy felt a flood of sensations that his human nervous system had never been designed to process. He saw through senses that had no names, experienced the universe from a perspective that included dimensions his mind could barely comprehend. For a moment, he understood what it was like to exist as pure consciousness, unbound by the limitations of physical form. But instead of being overwhelmed, Tommy found himself fascinated. The shadow Leviathan was trying to share its world with him, to show him what it was like to be a being of pure thought and energy. In return, Tommy shared more of his own experiences, showing the creature what it was like to exist in a physical body, to taste food, to feel sunshine on skin. The exchange continued for what felt like hours, though Tommy had lost all sense of time. Gradually, he began to understand the complex patterns the creature created in the air. They weren't just random movements or instinctive behaviors. They were art, expressions of thoughts and emotions too complex for words. The shadow Leviathan was an artist, a philosopher, a being of incredible intelligence and sensitivity who had been labeled a monster simply because no one had bothered to try to understand it. Tommy stood up slowly, and the creature moved with him, its shadowy form flowing around him like a protective cloak. For the first time in 2 centuries, the shadow Leviathan was not alone. "I understand now," Tommy said aloud, knowing the creature would feel his meaning even if it couldn't comprehend his words. "You're not a monster. You're just lost." The creature's response came not in words but in a flood of gratitude so intense that Tommy nearly collapsed from the emotional weight of it. The shadow Leviathan had found something it had never dared hope for: understanding. Tommy walked toward the chamber door, and the creature followed, its movements now flowing in harmony with his steps. As they approached the exit, Tommy felt a moment of uncertainty. The universe above was about to discover that everything they thought they knew about the shadow Leviathan was wrong. But that was exactly what needed to happen. The galaxy had to learn that strength and domination weren't the only ways to interact with dangerous forces. Sometimes, the most powerful tool was simple compassion. Tommy placed his hand on the door control and looked back at his new companion. "Ready to show them who you really are?" The shadow Leviathan's response came as a complex pattern of light that danced through its shadowy form, beautiful and joyful in a way that no one above could have imagined. Together they opened the door and began the long journey back to the surface, where an emperor waited to learn that his world now belonged to a 12-year-old boy from Earth. The elevator's ascent seemed to take forever, though Tommy knew it had only been an hour since he had descended into the depths. Every floor they passed brought them closer to a confrontation that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. The shadow Leviathan moved beside him in the elevator, its form condensed into a more compact configuration that still somehow managed to radiate an aura of contained power. Krex and Vex had been waiting at level -26 when Tommy emerged from the deepest chamber, and their expressions had been priceless. Two veteran guards who had seen every kind of horror the galaxy could produce, struck speechless by the sight of a human child walking calmly beside the most feared creature in known space. "This is impossible," Vex had whispered, his translation implant struggling to convey the awe in his voice. "The creature, it follows you willingly?" Tommy had nodded, placing a gentle hand on what might have been the shadow Leviathan's shoulder. The contact had sent ripples of light through the creature's shadowy form, patterns that Krex recognized as expressions of contentment. "It was never wild," Tommy had explained. "It was just lonely." Now, as they approached the palace levels where the assembled dignitaries waited, Tommy felt the weight of what was about to happen. Emperor Zaxthul had made his promise before witnesses from across the galaxy. If he tried to back out now, it would destroy the Vorthak Empire's reputation for honor and reliability. But would he honor an agreement made with a human child? Tommy had learned enough about galactic politics to know that promises made to lesser species were often considered flexible by those in power. The elevator reached the Grand Assembly Hall, and the doors opened to reveal a scene of barely controlled chaos. The gathered alien dignitaries had been waiting for hours, their conversations growing more animated as time passed. Some had wagered on how long the human child would survive in the deep chamber. Others had debated whether his remains would be recoverable. None had seriously considered the possibility that he might succeed. Emperor Zaxthul sat on his floating throne, his 4 arms folded in a posture of imperial patience. His reptilian features showed no emotion, but Tommy could see the tension in his posture. The Emperor had expected this farce to be over quickly, probably with a traumatized human delegation begging forgiveness for their presumption. "Your Imperial Majesty," Krex announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent assembly hall, "the human child has returned from the deep chamber." The silence that followed was absolute. Hundreds of alien beings holding their breath as they waited to see what had become of the primitive who had dared to challenge the impossible. Tommy stepped out of the elevator, and the crowd gasped in unison. He appeared unharmed, his clothes slightly dusty, but his eyes clear and alert. There were no signs of the psychic trauma that had destroyed previous challengers. But it was what followed Tommy out of the elevator that caused the real shock. The shadow Leviathan flowed into the Grand Assembly Hall like liquid night, its form expanding to its full 12-meter length as it found space to move. The creature's presence sent waves of instinctive terror through the gathered crowd, but something was different about its behavior. Instead of the aggressive posture that surveillance recordings had always shown, the shadow leviathan moved with fluid grace, its attention focused entirely on the small human walking beside it. Emperor Zaxthul felt his blood turn cold as he realized what he was seeing. The boy had done it. Somehow, impossibly, the primitive human had succeeded where the greatest minds in the galaxy had failed. "I believe we had an agreement, Your Imperial Majesty," Tame said, his young voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I have tamed the Shadow Leviathan, and according to your sworn oath before these witnesses, that grants me dominion over this world." The Emperor's mind raced through his options. He could claim the creature wasn't truly tamed, that some form of trickery was involved. But even as he considered it, the Shadow Leviathan moved to position itself protectively around the boy, its shadowy form creating patterns of light that could only be interpreted as expressions of loyalty and affection. "This is not possible," declared Carvex, the reptilian ambassador from the hegemony. "The Shadow Leviathan cannot be tamed. Our greatest experts have confirmed this repeatedly." Tommy looked up at the alien diplomat with the calm confidence that had carried him through the deepest challenge of his life. "Your experts were wrong. They tried to dominate the creature through force and psychic manipulation. They never tried to understand it." "Understand it?" The floating jellyfish representative from the ethereal collective pulsed with disbelief. "The creature is a psychic predator. It exists only to consume mental energy. There is nothing to understand." "That's where you're wrong," Tommy replied, and the Shadow Leviathan responded to his words by creating a complex geometric pattern in the air above the assembly. The pattern was beautiful, intricate, and unmistakably the product of intelligent thought rather than predatory instinct. "The Shadow Leviathan isn't a mindless predator," Tommy continued, his voice growing stronger as he found his confidence. "It's an artist, a philosopher, a being capable of complex thought and emotion. It only attacked previous challengers because they came with the intent to dominate and control. It was defending itself from what it perceived as threats." Dr. Webb pushed through the crowd, his scientific mind reeling from the implications. "Tommy, are you saying the creature is sentient, truly intelligent?" "More than intelligent," Tommy replied. "It experiences reality in ways we can barely comprehend. It can perceive dimensions of existence that our human senses can't detect. For 2 centuries, it has been creating art that no one bothered to recognize as art, expressing thoughts that no one bothered to try to understand." The Shadow Leviathan seemed to respond to the conversation, creating another light pattern that spiraled upward toward the crystal dome of the palace. This time, several of the more perceptive observers began to see the deliberate structure within the seemingly random movements. "It's been trying to communicate," Ambassador Chen breathed, her diplomatic training finally allowing her to see the situation clearly. "All this time, it's been trying to reach out, and everyone interpreted its attempts at contact as aggression." Emperor Zaxthul felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as he realized the full scope of what had just happened. The human boy hadn't just tamed the Shadow Leviathan. He had revealed it to be a sapient being deserving of rights and recognition under galactic law. The creature couldn't be owned or contained if it was truly intelligent. But more immediately pressing was the matter of his sworn oath. He had promised to grant dominion over the capital world to anyone who could tame the creature, and he had made that promise before representatives from every major power in the galaxy. To break such an oath would destroy his empire's credibility and potentially trigger a coalition of enemies eager to exploit any sign of weakness. "The challenge was met fairly," declared the ancient voice of Morgoth, the crystalline being who served as the Galactic Council's primary legal observer. "The creature demonstrates clear signs of willing cooperation with the human child. By the laws of binding oath and witness challenge, the terms have been fulfilled. Emperor Zaxthul closed his 4 eyes and made the hardest decision of his long reign. When he opened them again, his expression had shifted from shock to a cold calculation that his courtiers recognized as his most dangerous mood. "Indeed," the emperor said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of imperial authority. "A sworn oath is sacred, and the terms were met exactly as specified. The human child has demonstrated mastery over the shadow Leviathan, and therefore claims dominion over this world." The murmur that ran through the crowd was like distant thunder. The capital world of the Vorthak Empire, changing hands because of a bet made by an overconfident ruler. It was the kind of political earthquake that would reshape the balance of power across 17 star systems. But Tame surprised everyone with his response. "I accept the grant of dominion," he said formally, "but I immediately offer it back to your Imperial Majesty under specific terms." The Emperor's eyes snapped open wide. This was not what he had expected. "Terms?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I propose a treaty between humanity and the Vorthak Empire. In exchange for returning administrative control of this world to you, I ask for 3 things. The political implications hit Ambassador Chen like a thunderbolt. The boy was offering the Emperor a way to save face while securing unprecedented advantages for humanity. It was diplomacy of the highest order, delivered by a 12-year-old who shouldn't have understood the first thing about interstellar politics. "State your terms," the Emperor said, his voice carefully neutral. "First," Tame began, "humanity receives full membership in the Galactic Council, not just observer status. We become equal partners in galactic civilization. Second, the Shadow Leviathan is recognized as a sapient being with full rights under galactic law. It will not be returned to captivity, and its people on Mordun must be contacted and invited to join the galactic community as equals." The second term caused another stir among the crowd. If the Shadow Leviathan was truly intelligent, then keeping it captive for 2 centuries constituted slavery under galactic law. The implications went far beyond this single creature. "Third," Tame continued, "humanity is granted the right to establish an embassy here on the capital world with full diplomatic immunity and the authority to represent Earth's interests in galactic affairs." Emperor Zaxthul considered the terms, his political mind analyzing each clause for potential advantages and pitfalls. The boy was offering him everything he needed to maintain his empire while securing remarkable gains for his own species. "And in exchange," the Emperor said slowly, "you return administrative control of my capital world?" "Yes, Your Majesty, but I retain the legal right to the dominion you granted, held in trust for the benefit of galactic peace and cooperation. Think of it as humanity's permanent stake in the heart of your empire." The genius of the arrangement was breathtaking. Tame would technically own the most valuable planet in Vorthak space, but he was offering to let the Emperor continue ruling it in exchange for unprecedented rights for humanity. It was a partnership that benefited everyone while completely changing humanity's position in galactic society. "These terms are acceptable," Emperor Zaxthul declared, and Tame could hear the relief in his voice. "Let it be recorded that this day marks the beginning of a new alliance between the Vorthak Empire and the human species of Earth." As the crowd erupted in excited conversation, Tame felt the Shadow Leviathan's shadowy form brush against his mind one final time. The creature was saying goodbye. Not in words, but in a flood of gratitude and affection that left Tame blinking back tears. "Where will you go?" Tame asked quietly, knowing the creature would understand his meaning. The response came as images and emotions rather than words. The deep spaces between stars, where beings of living energy could exist without the need for physical worlds. The shadow Leviathan would search for others of its kind, carrying with it the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy there existed a species called humanity that understood the value of compassion over conquest. As the shadow Leviathan began to fade from view, becoming translucent as it prepared to leave physical existence behind, Tommy felt a hand on his shoulder. Ambassador Chen stood beside him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "How did you understand what no one else could see?" Tommy thought about his answer carefully. "On Earth, we have a saying. The most dangerous animals are usually the most afraid ones. The shadow Leviathan wasn't dangerous because it was evil. It was dangerous because it was terrified and alone." Dr. Webb joined them, shaking his head in amazement. "Tommy, do you realize what you've accomplished? You've not only secured humanity's place in galactic society, you've fundamentally changed how we understand intelligence and consciousness. And you've made us all very wealthy," Ambassador Chen added with a smile. "A 12-year-old human boy now owns the most valuable piece of real estate in known space." Tommy grinned, the first genuinely childlike expression he had shown since entering the palace. "Wait until my mom finds out I got a new pet and accidentally conquered a planet in the same day. She's going to be so mad about the pet part." The laughter that followed helped break the tension that had been building throughout the day, but Tommy's achievement would echo through galactic history for centuries to come. The day a human child taught the galaxy that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't strength or technology or psychic mastery. It was understanding. Years later, when Tommy Rodriguez became Earth's first galactic ambassador, historians would debate whether his success with the shadow Leviathan was due to luck, skill, or some uniquely human trait that other species lacked. The truth, Tommy knew, was much simpler. He had looked at a creature everyone called a monster and seen what it really was: a lonely individual in need of a friend. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The shadow Leviathan's final gift to Tommy was a message that would guide humanity's expansion into the stars. In the vastness of space, no one needs to be alone. As the celebration of the new alliance began around them, Tommy watched the last traces of his shadow friend disappear into dimensions beyond human perception. The creature was free now, able to search for its own people among the stars, carrying with it proof that intelligence and compassion could exist in forms that others might never expect to find. The boy who had walked into the depths as humanity's representative emerged as something more, the architect of a new age where understanding would triumph over fear, and where the galaxy's greatest challenges could be solved not through force, but through the simple act of trying to see the universe through someone else's eyes. Emperor Zaxthul, watching from his throne as the human delegation was surrounded by congratulating dignitaries, made a mental note that would influence Vorthak policy for generations. Never underestimate a species that sends children to do what warriors cannot accomplish. And in the depths of space, where energy beings danced between the stars, word began to spread of a small blue world whose inhabitants possessed a gift that the galaxy had been waiting eons to discover: the ability to see past their fears and find friendship in the most unlikely places. The age of humanity in the galaxy had begun not with conquest or domination, but with a 12-year-old boy who had looked into the darkness and offered it his hand in friendship.